Okay, that's wonderful. We'll have a little bit more stuff today, a little bit more stuff next time, and next class we'll basically be wrapping this up. I'm just going to open my file. You guys obviously can't do recent files because you're on these computers and they don't save the recent files. So in any cinema file, you just go to File Open and open your file. No big deal. I would get in the habit of any software you ever use, avoid just double clicking the file because you don't know where it's going to open up or what it's going to open up or how it's going to do it. Just get in the habit of opening the program and then opening the file. It just makes your life in the future especially a little bit easier, especially if you stick to 3D. Maya hates when you double click a file and open it. I have, on this computer, I have 3 versions of Maya, so when I double click, it could open up in any one of these, hence making it not backwards compatible for some things, so I have to be aware of that, okay? Cool. So, just to recap what we went over last week, all right? So, we created this room, all right? How did we create this room? Cube, and then we did what to this face? Deleted it. Simple stuff, right? We also organized it, right? So, we put it on a layer so that we have our shell, so we could turn the visibility on and off if we need to. We also went up here and went to room shell and renamed it there so that we have a room shell organized here, a shell there, it's there, very organized already. All right. Then we did a bookcase. Now for this one, we went a little bit more in depth with that cube, right? So we still started off with a cube. This time we added what? Columns and rows, right? Or subdivisions both ways, okay? Then we moved them to get them to be in the same spots as where we would want extrusions to happen, where we want these push-in areas, these cave or cavities set up. And then we just grabbed them and pushed it in. That was it. Same thing happened over here. One of these I started with for the demo. The other one I did, with a different way to kind of show it. Same process though. Okay. And then we did a little picture frame thing / TV. Now with all of these, you could do it, again, a number of different ways. It doesn't have to be one specific way that you do it. It's just a matter of finding out which way is going to work best. In the past, when I've done assignments, literally, if you watched how I modeled a desk one semester versus another semester versus another semester, the desk turns out exactly the same, but how I get there is different. It has nothing to do with the software. It's just in which tools I feel most applicable to use at that time, okay? So I kind of shape the proportions of the picture frame or TV. I hit C so that I can edit it. I go to face mode and I click on it. Now here's a new one. So I can right click, right, and see all these different things that I could do to this specific item. Right clicking is definitely something you can do, but always want to figure out hotkeys. Hotkeys are typically the fastest way. So look next to each one of these items and you'll see some letter combinations, okay? So I'm going to go to where extrude is, which is right hither, right there. And you remember we were hitting D to get to the extrude? Yes? No? Maybe it's blur. Last week's a blur? Maybe. So D is the hotkey for extrude. You'll also see that there's an M, tilde, and then a T. If you didn't know, that little squiggle thing is called a tilde. So M tilde T is another way that you can get to this, okay? So just so you can see it, if I hit the M key, it brings up this menu. Here's all our modeling tools. And then I'm not touching the mouse. If you touch the mouse, it goes away. Yep. So if you just hit M, and then there's all the stuff you can do for modeling. So then I could hit T, which was the extrude, right there, and I could get to that. All right. For this specific one, though, I need to do an extrude inner so that I shrink the size of that face. I still need to keep the outer dimension. I just need another face kind of in the inside. So if I go to if I go to right click again, you'll see that there's an extrude inner. Its hotkey is M tilde W. I'm just going to say MW. I'm not going to say M tilde W. That sounds ridiculous. MW. Or I can hit I, right? So if I just come over here and hit I, now I'm on extrude inner. everything in the software, for now at least, is going to be a tool, meaning that I have to actually do something in order for it to apply. Okay? So I'm in the extrude inner tool right now. Nothing has actually happened. I click and drag on this face, and now it's going to extrude inwards. Okay? Then I hit D, and I can go to the extrude tool and click and drag and extrude inwards. Okay? So that's how you can make just a quick picture frame. Okay? Or TV. Or desktop screen. Or anything that's shaped like that. Okay? It could actually be a door too, like a closet door. Or a window. Or lots of things. Okay? So I'm going to go back to my model mode, and let's just stick this, oopsie, over here on the wall. Gorgeous.
Mine's not letting me like select surfaces.
Okay, so let's go here, because this is something that everyone's going to run into, or has already run into. So you're in this, you go to this, and you can't select anything, right? Any guesses why I can't do that? I haven't, right? So I haven't told Cinema I want to make it editable. Okay, right now it's still kind of in this set up the basic parameters of it. Once I hit C, then I can go through and click on the faces. Okay, very good. Alright, so after we modeled a few things, then we started creating materials. We went down to this area. We double-clicked, created a material, right here, double-clicked. It creates a material. We gave it a name based on what it is. Eventually, we'll get into naming things specifically instead of being like room ceiling or room floor. It'll be ceiling paint or black plastic or black shiny plastic or black rough plastic or something. Something we would typically use across the board. If I'm doing this room here, and the white / beige of whatever this color plastic is here, that might also be used on the desks. Well, I wouldn't call it white desk and light and this and that material. I would just call it white bumpy plastic. Okay. We picked the color. Gorgeous. We went to reflectance. We changed this to default. We didn't really play with the settings, but I'll show today how we can play with some of these a little bit more. And then we just drug it onto the item we wanted. So this one I could just drag onto that or whatever. Now, one thing to point out too, in other software, like Maya, if I drag a material onto an object, it automatically overwrites the old one. It gets rid of the old one and puts this one on here. Cinema does not do that. Cinema actually keeps both materials there. So if you see up here on bookcase, there's 2 materials on that. Okay? Now, if I zoom in on this, you won't see any of the old material on this one, okay? Because this green is basically overwriting every face. Every single face on this has that green. It's not until you get into using selection maps like this thing, or selection tags, that it would isolate certain faces. That's how we were able to get this room to have the ceiling, the floor, and the walls all be different colors. Okay? But the nice thing about this is I can take that green and just delete it, and now it's back to the old one. Okay? So it's very handy in how they do that. I like in Maya how it does overwrite it, but I like in Cinema how I can see each one of those things to see the material right there of what is assigned to it. Alright, so what we're going to do today is we're going to build a desk out. Okay? So our desk that we're going to be creating here, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm using a trackball, but pick a darker color, there we go. Go down further here. There. Yeah, really have to forgive me on this one. Next time I'll bring a tablet, or I'll have a tablet ready to go. And just pretend that those are all 3D. That's 3D. That's gorgeous. Those are legs.
Is that a chair?
That is a desk.
Okay.
If you're not sure what a trackball is and why this is like so crazy, a trackball is this, so I don't actually have to move my hand around. I just move my thumb around, and that's how I'm drawing. So it's very, Yeah, it works really good for doing regular stuff, not for drawing. Okay, so that's kind of the desk that we're going to be creating in this scenario. Now, looking at this, we have a couple different things that we could do. Number one, we could model the top separate. We could model the legs separate and put them all together. I don't want to do that for this assignment. I want you to see how we could build it all out of one shape. Because if you ever do like a gaming asset, which is huge now because gaming assets are on interactive devices or in actual video games, online stuff, all over the place. You have to build stuff as few polygons as possible, as little resolution as possible inside the actual item. So for this, we want to build it all out of one shape. Now looking at this design here, I'm going to look at it from the top, and this will actually be a little bit nicer to see, because I can actually hold on shift. There we go. See how straight I can draw that line with a shift key. Perfect. Okay. So this one here is what the top view of this is going to look like. So we have just the outline of our desk, and then this line here is where the shelving unit part is going to come out. Okay. So initially we need something like that, but because we're doing these legs too, I also need to have some stuff kind of separated for the legs. Right there, okay? So this area here, I will use a different color. I will even go to a new layer. Make my brush bigger. This area here is going to be all where the bookshelf spot is. This area here, boop, that's where the legs are going to be, okay? On the bottom, I'm going to extrude the legs out. On the top, I'm just going to extrude the bookcase part up. That makes sense, right? Okay. So that's what we have to start with for our initial shape. We have to create a shape that looks like this. Now you'll notice it looks very similar to the thing we just created, right? The bookcase. It's just laying this way instead of being upwards. So from the top view, this is what we need to create. So inside Cinema, I'm going to create a box. And again, worry about proportions. Don't worry about the actual physical size of this. It's actually quite humorous when you actually put it in your room and it's like 10 times bigger than the room. Okay, so start off with something like this. So I have a cube. It's kind of thin, not super thin like a wafer. It's thin like a piece of wood. And I have 3 segments going in one direction, 4 segments going in the other direction. So you have to make sure that your display is set to Gorad shading lines. And then you can see those divisions. All right, just a couple things that are important to pay attention to when you do something like this. On this object, we have this object tab right here. This is what allows us to add segments, okay? The second we hit the C key or we make it editable, right, it goes away. You can still add points to it, but it makes it more difficult at this point, all right? So for now, what we should be doing is making sure we're in this model mode, grabbing these dots. So if you don't see the dots, you're probably not in model mode. And then you can scale it up. And then you can just add your segments. Okay? Now, like I said, the direction that you've scaled yours is going to depend on where you're adding your divisions. For segment Y, you're not going to add any divisions there. You shouldn't be anyway, because there's nothing going up and down. If I were to have modeled this way and that way, then I would switch my numbers. Actually, no, that's the right way anyway. 3, 4. Yeah, that's the wrong way. 4 and 3. That's the right way. Okay? So if you look at it, I have 4 divisions going here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I have 3 divisions going the other way. 1, 2, 3. Cool. Do we have that? Anyone not have it? Getting there? Okay. There you go. So now we're going to go on to the next stage of adjusting these lines. The object thing, all that does is set us up. We're good. We've set up our segments. We've set up our size of this. Now we're done with that. Now I want to actually go in there and grab the edges and start adjusting the edges to get more of this kind of shape. Okay? So what do I need to hit in order to get more of that shape? In order to edit these edges? C. So we hit C. Now we can edit the edges. So which one of these is edges?
The second one with the lines on it?
Yep, the second one with the lines on it. Okay, now don't do this. Don't click on an edge and then move it, and then click on the other edge and then move it. That's the bad way to do things. You want to double click. When you double click, what happens is it loops all the way around and grabs that entire loop of edges. If you're not sure, look around it. If I hide my shell, I can really see underneath it too. There we go. Okay, so I can see exactly that it selected that entire thing, and then I need to move this back. Now, how far back do you think I'm going to move that?
How big do you want your legs to be?
Exactly. How big do I want my legs to be? If I'm a bodybuilder, I want them to be like that big. If I'm bikini season, I'm going to go back here. All right. So the width of this will depend on how big your legs are. Okay. Now we're going to be using, however wide this one is, we're going to go the other way, the same thing. Okay. So it's going to be pretty square. Your stuff. A lot of people think that I selected it like this, so I have to somehow manage to move that line exactly where I want it. No, you're not stuck there. You can move the camera around. You can tap the middle mouse button, go into your top view, and then move this exactly where you want it. Okay? Now I wanted to see how many people got it. A couple people did this already. If you shift double click that line and you go to your scale, remember that too, we can scale outward to evenly space those. For this assignment, not a big deal. Later assignments, it'll be more precise, so we want to do that. Okay? So then I'm going to go to the other direction and scale these up and try to get them as square as possible. Again, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. Just get it as best as you can. Okay. Now once you have the long ones on the outside and the short ones on the outside, is that square? Yeah, that's fine. Okay. What do you think this middle one is?
That's what divides the bookcase area.
Right. That's what's going to divide the bookcase from the rest of the desk. So if this one is, pretend that this is the front of my desk. If this one is all the way over here, I really don't have a lot of workspace. If it's all the way back here, I really don't have a lot of book space, right? So find a happy spot for that. Doesn't have to be in any specific spot, but just try to find a happy spot.
Gorgeous.
Yep. Cool. And what do they call it? A hutch, right? That's what the top part is, a hutch? Yeah. Okay. Now here's what I was talking about before about not grabbing anything but that one direction. If I click here and I start dragging, do you see how I have a zigzag in it? That zigzag is going to be on my desk now forever. Okay, so my desk will actually be like this weird wobbly shape. See, so no matter what I do, it's actually up and over. So be careful of that. If it happens, just hit undo, get it to go away, and then redo it again. This shape that I created, it's taken us a little bit longer, obviously, because it's our first time making the shape, but it'll take you 3 seconds to do it, as opposed to some people trying to, they screw it up, and then they're like, oh, I can fix it, and they spend an hour and a half trying to line this up perfectly, and it doesn't work. There we go. I could delete it and remake it in half the time. Okay? So, by the time you are ready for the next stage, you should be here. All right. Cool. All right, so now we can just decide. Do we want to go legs first, or do we want to go hutch first? I'm going to just say let's do legs first. Okay, so I'm going to go grab the legs. So I switched to faces. The hotkey for switching to faces is just hitting the enter key. You can cycle between all three of those items. Okay, so I'm just shift clicking those squares. Okay, make sure you do not select anything else. So after you're done selecting those three squares, spin around your model and make sure that you haven't accidentally selected something on the opposite side. Because when you start extruding, what's going to happen to the other side of it if you start extruding the bottom? It's going to extrude the top or the back or whatever. Okay, we good? We have our legs selected?
Yeah.
Awesome. So what tool do you think we would use to pull these out?
The pull tool?
The pull tool. Let me rephrase the question. What tool would you use to extrude these out? There we go. So we hit D. That gets us to the extrude tool. And then we just click and drag. Okay. Drag right, it's going one way. Drag left, it's going the other way.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, that explains so much.
Right. If you were to just move it, it'll actually like dent the desk in, right? So we have to make sure we're in the extrude tool and then clicking and dragging right on one of those squares to pull it out. You may have to zoom in a bit. Once it's zoomed or once it's extruded, then you can use the pull tool as he said, or we can just use the move tool. Okay.
Oh gosh, my desk is so
Yeah. And that's what we're going to find out. Our desks are not proportionate yet. No big deal. We will tweak those later. Okay? So another option that you may want to make sure you set every time you come in is under Cameras Navigation, set that to Object Mode. Okay? You may have already experienced it that as you start spinning and orbiting in your scene, the desk is here. You want to look at the desk and it spins and the desk then flies off screen. Okay? With object mode, it says you're selected on the desk, you're doing stuff to the desk, I'm going to spin around that specific object, okay? The one that's on is cursor mode, which means wherever you click and drag, that's what it's going to start spinning around, all right? So always set it to object mode. That's the best one in the world. All right. Now, just so you can see this too, and you can undo it and redo your extrude if you want, it doesn't matter. So on these extrudes here, I clicked and drug one time and it pulls them out. Okay, so I have one division from here where they started to here where they ended. Okay, so if I just hit undo just so you can see this, if I click and drag and then I click and drag and then I click and drag, do you see how it's creating extra lines every time it does that? Every one of those is like a new extrude. Okay, for this assignment it's not a huge deal, it's not going to kill anything. But why have it, right? So typically you want to have a nice line that comes straight down like this. Now when you do any of the tools in Cinema, they're like, it does the tool and then you have options for that specific tool. So we did the tool and then you'll see over here in my attributes on the right that I have options for it. So one of those is offset. So if I go in here to my offset and I start clicking on that arrow, or I click and drag on it, you can see how I can adjust where that is.
Just like a regular move tool.
Right, it's now like a regular move tool, but what's cool about it is that it's offsetting all of those. In some cases, we may not extrude straight, okay? So imagine that I had a sphere, there's a face here and a face there. I extrude them, they're gonna go like this. So if I switch to the move tool will only go this way, that way, up, or down. This offset will continue them on their path. Okay? I'll show that just so you can visualize it a little bit better. So there's a sphere. I'm going to click on one face. Let me just move the sphere up so it's not on my desk. There we go. Yeah, that's what I need for my room. All right. And we'll just make it even more complicated. We got all these. There we go. And I think I actually extruded on accident. I did. There we go. All right, so I have these weird faces all over the place. I click and drag, see how they go out, right? So now, if I wanted to adjust that further, hold on, I have to click back off. Sometimes it doesn't get you right into it. That's like one of my pet peeves of this software. There we go. Now I go back into it, and then I extrude. Perfect. Then I can just do this offset, and it'll continue on that trajectory. Now, if I go to the move tool, see how it's only moving them all up or all down, or obviously all right or left or whatever. So that's where you would use that offset in order to do that. We could also use this tool, which you'll see a little bit later for stuff like this. I have these three faces that are right next to each other, and I extrude. See how they're all together? If I change this max angle, sorry, if I turn off preserve group, there we go. Now they're separated. Okay, so then we could do other stuff to something like this. All right, we could also create caps, create n-gons, whatever. We'll play with more options later. But just so you're aware of it, there are options for each tool there. If they don't show up the first time, typically I just undo, deselect my stuff, reselect my stuff, go back to the tool. The workflow is pretty quick, so that's what's nice about it. All right, so we have our desk here. We could, I think Aaron was talking about this, we could adjust our size of these to kind of taper the legs down, right? I could just go into each one of these and size it. Sometimes in some software, there actually is options in here that would allow you to do that to all of them. So if I went to normal scale, that one might do it. Yep. So if I go to normal scale, do you see how it's scaling all of those at the same time? Okay. So you don't have to know what a normal is at this point, but basically instead of me going into the scale tool and trying to scale these, which would do that to my desk, it grabs each one of those faces individually and scales each face individually. Okay? So you can do that if you would like to. I think it looks pretty fancy, so I'm going to right click and go back to normal scale, or $. That's the stupidest hotkey in the world. $. And then just scaling that down. Just a hair, nothing crazy. Again, you can do that later too. You're not locked into anything. By the time you get through this desk, you can do a chair in a very similar fashion. You'll see the process for all of it. All right, so now here's where people get tripped up, because you think you know what the next step is, but you don't, okay? So I'm going to grab all of these faces on the back for my bookshelf, okay? So I should have 6 faces selected, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, I can count. Now, before I even extrude this, I'm going to look at these faces here and do a little assessment. So remember, we have the line set up for the leg width, right? Yes? Cool. Right now, my shelf, okay, the part that's going to come up on the hutch, is the same width as my leg, right here. That's a piece of wood. That's going to be the side of my hutch. So that piece of wood is like this thick. Okay, that's a pretty heavy-duty hutch, especially compared to that's thicker than my actual desk. So before I even do that, I'm just going to grab these 2 edges here and here, go to my scale, and just give them a little nudge. Okay, and the same thing with this. I'm just going to give this a little nudge back. Just move it back. There we go.
Why are you moving this?
Because the thickness of my wood would look ridiculous. Okay? When we went to this bookcase here, and we started extruding stuff, basically we want the wood to be about like this thick. Otherwise, it would have been like this thick. It would have been like twice that thickness or 3 times that thickness. So we're just changing this so that they fit a little bit better. Okay. All right, so now that I have that, I'm going to go to my extrude. You can do this a number of ways. This is the way that I found is most straightforward. I'm going to click and drag my extrude. Now watch when I do it, and then you can do it. I'll do it a couple times if you need to. So I'm going to extrude it to the bottom of my shelf. Okay? So if I go back to my wonderful drawing here, I'm extruding it to the bottom of where this line would be. Then I'm going to extrude it again for the thickness of that shelf. Then I'm going to extrude it again for how big the opening is. Then I'm going to extrude it again for how big the top part is. And then I just, come on. There we go. Then I can just extrude those and push them in. Okay, I'll do it again so you can see it. First thing, I reshaped these lines so that they're nice and laid out. I extrude it 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. Okay, if you didn't, now it's just a matter of clicking on these 2 areas and then extruding them inward. Okay, and typically what I do when I extrude something, I'm trying to give it some thickness. In this kind of situation, it doesn't matter. It's never going to exist in the real world, so the actual physical thickness of that wall doesn't mean anything to us. So when I go here, I go all the way through. See how I'm through now because I don't see my orange stuff? And then I just pull it back. Okay? If this was something I'm going to be 3D printing, that would matter more, and I'd want to make sure that I go into wireframe and actually give it some thickness. If you're not aware of it, we have a 3D printer. There's one right here, and then we have like a whole room of them down the hall in T-Building, and we can print 3D stuff. In a couple days, weeks, you'll see a showcase that has some of the 3D stuff. It's always something to be aware of because people don't know we have it and things you can create in it. It is pretty sweet. Okay. Now, why do we do it this way, right? So the reason that we did it this specific way is just because it makes it easier to set up each one of these things, okay? Because it's easy just to extrude it, extrude it, extrude it, extrude it, grab the 2 faces and push it in. Now, I like to show different ways to do things. Oopsie boopsie. There we go. Okay. So here's another way. So I could have just extruded this to its full height. Okay, so now I have the exact height that I would want. Then I could have gone into my edge mode, gone to another tool called the knife tool, where I can add loops. And then I can just go in here and say, what? Oh, stupid. Okay. I have to go to my extrude tool first. Yes. There we go. I'm going to extrude this again. So Cinema remembered my previous settings for extrude, which did not have preserved groups on. So what happened was it separated each one of those pieces when I extruded up. Okay. So now when I go to K-Knife, now I can go in here and say I want a shelf here, and I want this one there. Okay, so that's another way that I can get that. The goal is I need some sort of box that has divisions here, here, and here. How you get there is completely up to you, okay? I'm here for guidance for those kinds of things. I know I've modeled a billion different items. I know how to start things. I know how to get to the end. There we go. Gorgeous. Okay. So there's our stuff. Now, this is the point where we would want to size this and adjust things. So if we get to here and we're like, holy cow, this desk is, like in my case, that desk is like really tall off the ground and it just looks kind of weird, right? Like, however tall this is, these books are like, you know what TV Guide is, right? Okay. This is like TV Guides. That's what would fit there pretty much. Or maybe those golden books. All right, so that's what I want to do. I'm going to turn on my shell, and I'm going to basically get this into my room just to see proportion-wise how big this is. Here is my bookcase. Here's my desk. So I can adjust this a couple ways. The obvious one is scaling. Whoops. So grabbing not on any of these, but just kind of grabbing near them, I can scale up the entire desk. Now, keep in mind everything else in the room. I have picture frames or TVs. I have my bookcase. I have this. It might make sense to maybe scale down my bookcase to fit a more appropriate size room rather than trying to scale everything up to that. If I get to the situation like I'm at now where my desk is very unproportionate, okay, I'll just set it over here so we can see it. My legs are way too tall for this room. I want to shrink the legs, okay? So what I can do is go to my points here. So if I go to the points, and I want to marquee all the points and basically just move the points down or up, depending on how I want to adjust this. So if I switch this here, this is your selection tool. There's a live selection, which is basically just clicking on stuff or painting over them. So just so you can see it, I'm painting over the top of these. This will take forever on a model to do. I'm trying to think if I ever used that, maybe once or twice, not really. Rectangle selection is the one I typically go to the most. So while we're all here, go to this and go to rectangular selection. Okay, when you switch to rectangular selection, on your attributes in the bottom right, we have to set some things up under the options. The default is set for tolerance selection and only visible elements. Oops, sorry. That's the default. Tolerance selection is off and only visible elements is on. Is that correct? Yes? Okay. What this means, tolerance selection. I'm going to go to faces just so you can see it. If I marquee these faces here, do you see how it's not selecting any of the middle shelves? Okay, even though I'm marqueeing them, it's not selecting them. With tolerance selection off, you have to marquee the entire object in order for that to be selected. So if I wanted these middle faces, I'd have to make sure I marqueed the entire middle face. All right. Now, the other reason it's not selecting this is because only select visible elements is on. So basically, if we can't see an element, or Cinema can't see it, it won't select it. So when I marquee something, like, let me go back to points, and I marquee this, as I spin around, see how the back points are not selecting? Okay, so if I were to try to move this, it's going to do that. Okay, so my default settings for this are always be tolerant, and turn that one off. So tolerant is on, only select is off. Once you have that, then you can marquee this, and then you can adjust sizes. So I could literally just move this up and down like this. I can grab half of this like that, and then I can stretch it out. I can shrink it in. I can grab these ones and scoot that up or scoot that down. I can go to more of a top view. Notice how I'm spinning around the view too. I'm not just like sticking in one side. And I can really start to adjust what this is looking like. If I have something more specific, I want to adjust the thickness like of the desk, because it's kind of like really thin and wimpy. I would switch to like a side view, and then I would grab the stuff in the side view. There we go. And then stretch it out. Okay, so that gives it just a little bit more thickness here, and I can really kind of customize what that's looking like. All right, that seems like a more appropriate size. Now this isn't a standard bookcase. This is like a supersized bookcase. I have my statues in it. I have, I don't know, gold plates or something there. But again, I could shrink that down too, really simply. Oops. Or I could switch this in 2-point mode. Switch this into my rectangular selection. And I can stretch this out here.
Say I want to scale the overall size of something without changing the proportions. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, just scale. Just make sure you're in model mode and go to scale.
Oh,
Scale XYZ. They all scale the same thing.
Because that's where you could use these. If you turn one off.
Oh, that's okay.
I don't know why these are still there. Gone. There you go. Okay. So, size your desk up, adjust the proportions if you need to, and just give it a couple little tweaks for quicker. Alright, so now we have the next item we want to build. And that's going to be a chair, okay? So with the chair, I need a new layer. Okay, with our chair, we're starting off again with that square cube shape. And we're going to need some spots for legs. Okay, so just like before, here's what we're going to start off with. You see the squares in the corner, that's going to be the legs. we'll have a back on the chair that we can just use these same edges and faces for just by readjusting their position, and we can pull up the back of the chair. Okay. Now we will have like slats in this that go across, so you'll see how we do that too. We'll be introducing a couple new tools into this one. All right, so that's what we're going to start off with, is just this shape. So create basically the part that you put your butt on for the chair. All right, so we created that. We're pulling out the legs down here. Same process that we did before, right? Just extruding it down. And then if you wanted to taper them, you could right click. Even if you didn't remember what it was called, you know it's in the right click menu. Oh yeah, normal scale. You can normal scale it and taper the legs. Again, you don't have to taper them in either. If you want to do more of like a kid's room type thing.
Where everything's fat.
Right, where everything's fat, you could fatten up the legs, right? You could go normal scale, make them fatter like this. And then I could even pair that with a regular scale so that they're not sticking out. So I could do something, you know, stylized. Sweet. I'm going to leave it like that just because it looks weird. Okay. Now for the back of the chair. This thing is perfectly square, so it doesn't really matter where the back of it is. I guess I do have a little bit of a direction here. I'm going to leave in this case, I'm leaving the widest part is where I'm going to put the back of the chair. Okay. So I need basically like 2 rungs that I'm going to pull up. I'm going to extrude out just like we did the legs. So I'm going to give this to be the thickness of those rungs. So this is the front and back thickness. This is the side to side thickness. Okay. Now watch how I do this for the rungs. So I'm going to grab my whatever tool this is, the extrude tool, and I'm going to pull it up. Okay. Now in this case what I did is I pulled it just straight up. I need to have divisions inside here so that I could create connections between these things. One of my options over here in the extrude tool is subdivisions. Okay. So right now, we're going to use a tool called Bridge. And what Bridge does is it takes this face, and it connects them together. Okay? So basically I could have a face on this rung, a face on this rung, and it'll put those 2 faces together connected. So if I go like this, then I could connect this face to that face. And then I would have an opening and then that connection. I could add another rung, or another spacing. Then I could connect this face and that face together. The point of kind of visualizing what you're doing here is that you want to make sure that you have enough spaces for what you want to put in your chair, right?
How do you extrude it?
Just a regular extrude up and then just subdividing it here. So I would have a bevel or a bridge here, a space, a bridge, a space, a bridge, a space. Okay, so you see how I've kind of laid out where I'm having my bridges and my spaces. If I went one more short, so if I went to, let's say, 4, bridge, space, bridge, space, bridge. It's kind of weird to have a piece of wood right at the bottom of the chair. Okay, so again, we're going to go with an odd number. So 5, okay. And then just so you see the next step, so we're just going to start spacing these things out, okay? So here is how thick this rung is going to be. And I'm grabbing his buddy on the other side. Whoops. Here's how thick that rung is going to be. And that's how thick that rung is going to be. Okay, so extrude the backs up, add the 5 subdivisions, and then space them out so that they're nice like that. Okay, so bridge is one of those tools that is common across many 3D software. I'm just going to tweak that. Good. And for this to work, we're basically telling it blend, merge, whatever you want to call it. Bridge is what the tool is. Bridge from this face to that face. Okay, so watch how it does its stuff. I have to have this in a way that I could see both faces. So you see how I'm lined up really close? I can see both faces. I'm going to hit M. I'm just not going to move the arrow. I'm going to hit B to get to the bridge tool. And nothing's going to happen. Because in this one, I have to make sure that I have both faces selected. There we go. Now I go to the bridge tool, and then I'm just clicking here. Do you see the line that's there? Okay. That line is specifying the direction of what gets connected to what. So right now, let me spin around so you can see this better. So right now, as this connects, you see how this top right corner is pointed to this bottom right corner. Okay? So what would happen is that that one face would bridge, but it would twist. Okay? Because it's like offsetting it. Just so you can see it, that's what it's going to do. So it bridged it kind of in a weird way. That's a no-no. As I drag this across, that's what I want to do, is make sure that they connect to the appropriate face. So the corner across from it, that's where I want to let go. Then I switch off the tool. I go to the next one. I go back to bridge, which is just B. And I go to that one. There we go. All right, a couple other things I'd probably jot down are some of these settings that we're also doing. Every day, remember, your preferences get wiped, so you have to make sure you reset these things. Because in the videos, I'm not going to always remember to say, make sure this is set to this or this or this, because mine are already set to that. Okay? I try to, but I don't always. So one thing that you should always set up is under your camera's navigation, is to set it to object mode. Okay? You may have a list when you come into class. Here's the stuff that I should be doing every day. Copy my work, open Cinema, start setting my project information, and then you should be good.
Object mode just affects your
how it's rotating around, right? So just to show you that, if I went to
okay, so it doesn't even
if I went to center mode here, or sorry, if I went to cursor mode, wherever my cursor is, that's what it's kind of spinning around. So, see that little white plus sign in mine?
Yeah.
That's what it's spinning around.
I had mine set to cursor mode for the longest time, so it was
Yeah. So I always set this to object mode. That way, whatever object I'm working on, I can spin around that. Okay. So always set that. If you plan on using the rectangular selection, I would also make sure that I have the tolerance selection on and only select visible off. Okay, again, those are things that I always make sure that I have set up, because I know I'm going to do this. I'm going to say, okay, I want to adjust my chair, I'm going to grab stuff and move it, and I want it to do exactly that. If I don't have these selected correctly and I try to move something, I'm going to get some weird wonky behavior from this. Okay. Alright, so that should be good for now. Alright, you'll also notice that I extruded up on my chair too. So just because we've extruded, added the subdivisions, bridged across, doesn't mean that we need to be done with that surface. We could always adjust it and tweak it and whatever else later. I'm going to do a couple other things. You don't do these while I'm doing this. Just take some notes and maybe just draw a picture of what I'm doing. That will just help you kind of figure out what things are supposed to look like. So I want to give this chair a little bit of an arch to it so that it doesn't hurt my back too much. So I'm going to go to the knife tool, so I hit K. Okay, K for the knife tool. Or you could right click and find the knife tool right there. I'm going to use an edge loop set to restrict selection as off only visible is on, but I can't change that. Everything else should be good. Okay, restrictor selection is off. So now what I'm going to do is just add some divisions here. Okay, so knife tool, loop, restrict to selection is off, and then I can add loops right in the center. And then where do you think I'm going to put those loops? If I want this to be rounded,
You're gonna pull them out away.
right, I'm just going to do that.
That'll look rounded.
Okay, it will. All right, so that just gives it a little bit of an arch back there, so it looks a little bit softer. I can do them individually, so if I want to give it, you know, more support in the lower spine, I could do that, of course, and whatever else. Okay, you could even go into this here, oopsie, and you could grab that and just go, okay, now it's getting fancier, right?
Straight from IKEA.
Perfect. It's a fjord. All right. So now I have my chair. It's got some subdivisions. It's got some style to it. Duplicating in Cinema is simple. Before you go on to the next step, I recommend duplicating your item. So if you're in Photoshop or Illustrator and you want to duplicate something, what do you hold down? Control. So Control and then drag it over so you have a copy. We want a copy, so in case we F this one up, we can get back to the original, okay? So what we want to do is we make a copy of it, and then I'm going to add bevels to this, okay? So I'm going to put bevels all over the whole thing. Now what a bevel does is it takes my ugly square chair, and I'll hit Control R so you can see what this looks like really ugly. There it is, pretty ugly. And it adds these nice little rounded edges to it. And what that does is it helps pick up more light so that it looks a little bit more realistic. Not perfect, but a little bit more realistic, okay? So for bevel to work, I have to be in edge mode. I have to grab all of my edges. And I actually have to go to my select, and I'm going to do what's called a Fong break, okay? So I don't want to add a bevel over everything because it'll just add way too many divisions. So I'm going to do a Fong break. And I just hit override. And I think I want to put this at 93. I think that was good. Oops. Nope. There it is. So I just play with this number until I get exactly what I want. 72 seems like a good value. Okay. So you can see how it doesn't select these ones here. If I had a flat surface, it does me no good to add bevels along this flat surface. Where I have a perfect corner, that's where I want stuff to happen. Where I have a change in direction, that's where I want my bevels to happen. Okay? So I play with this Fong angle selection until I get that value. Then I go to M. Then I go to bevel, which is S. Some of these you just have to remember. B was taken, remember bridge? So they had to find something else. So now here's what bevel's going to do. I click and drag. Just like extrude, we click and drag on the face. On bevel, I'm going to click and drag on the edge. Okay. Now I'm going to take my subdivisions here and add just a couple subdivisions. So now I have this nice rounding that's happening at all of my intersections. I do a little once over just to make sure I grabbed everything, that there's nothing kind of funky happening. I could tweak my size, so maybe this is 1.5 instead of 2.5. That looks pretty good. And there we go. So now we have a nice little bevel on here. Now, side by side, you'll be able to see what just doing that little bevel does. Okay, does that one on the right look a little bit better at least than the one on the left? Right, just that little bit of highlight. That's what the bevel does. It catches a little bit of highlight and it just makes it look like that much better. Every surface has some sort of bevel to it. Even your monitors, they may be like kind of sharp here, but there is that highlight, that little line right there that you could bevel off. Okay, now to Aaron's point that this doesn't look rounded and looks horrible, I need to fix that too. So we have these things up here that are extra tools we can use. So this one is called subdivision surface. I make sure my object is clicked, I hold down Alt, and I click on subdivision surface. And then you see what happened. Okay, it was blocky and now it's rounded. So what subdivision surface does is it smooths stuff out by adding more divisions. It says here's your start of it, here's the end of it, and then it smooths out those transitions.
And that was a tool called subdivision? Or?
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little more in a second. You can see that there are some kind of weird things happening with my surface. A lot of that you're seeing just because there's no real texture to this. It's just a flat gray color, so it looks kind of wonky in some of these spots. Okay. Now, what subdivision surface does is it takes my object here, which is cube 2, and it puts it under this subdivision surface object. Okay. So basically, anything inside this little group up here would get subdivided. Now, there is an order that these things have to happen. So if I were to take my rickety chair, like this one, and I drop that into my subdivision surface, look what it did to it.
It
Okay?
looks like an inflatable.
Right. It's really blobby looking. Because what happens is, it doesn't have enough geometry there. So if there's a point here, and a point there, it's going to create this nice round arc. But with my bevels, there's like 3 points here and 3 points there. So basically it's going to hold all these corners and do a nice job smoothing out stuff. Okay? So I always do my bevels first and then my subdivision surface. All right? But with the way this is set up, look how easy it is just to take stuff out of that group and put stuff into the group. Okay? Now notice too that when I did drop it in there, that only the top one was actually subdivided. I'll drop it in again so you can see. I'll drop this into here. Do you see how this chair is no longer smooth? That one is now. Okay? So, something to pay attention to, that you can only have one object, for now at least, inside this subdivision group.
Can you not hold control and copy it? Or?
I could, yes. I could copy it, and I can also do what's called creating a group inside there, and then that group, everything inside the group would be subdivided.
Cool.
Okay? There are some, like I said, some wonky things happening with this one that I'm not too pleased about, but for now it works. Notice here this little check mark. So all of these things actually do stuff. Okay? So we kind of saw that this one is the layer one, right? So this is the blue layer for room shell, and if I go to my layers, blue shell, right? This subdivision surface has a little check mark. I turn it off, look what happened. It went away. Turn it on, turn it off, turn it on. Okay? So I could continue playing with this, I could adjust it, whatever. I'm just going to leave it like that for now. This is a learning exercise. This is not a portfolio exercise. Okay? That's all this is. It's just getting used to the tools. I'm just going to make a new layer real quick with this. And I'm just going to call this old junk. And that way I have a copy of that old junk. Basic chair. Okay. Now I have my new chair. There's not. In other software, you can actually hit buttons like in Maya, you can hit 3 and it'll automatically smooth stuff out. They don't have that inside here. You have to actually subdivide it in order for that to work. But there are options for this. So if I click on that, I can go down here and say how smooth it actually is. So maybe I only need 1 division versus having 3 divisions or 2 divisions. Okay. Notice here too, here's my layer. Old junk, the visibility is turned off, but when I hit my Control R to see what it looks like when it's rendered, my chair is still back. Okay? So this visibility is only for what you're seeing in your viewport. This one here is for what is actually going to render when I hit Control R. So I turn that off, hit Control R, and now that other chair is gone. Okay? So understanding what rendering is one thing, but seeing how to control these things is another thing. Alright, so I'm going to do, just real quick, another bevel to my desk. Where you at? You is. Okay, so I'm going to go to edges. I'm going to marquee all my edges. I'm going to go to select Fong break, because I only want to grab the hard corner edges. That got me all the hard corner edges. I hit M, I hit S.
Where'd you go to phone break?
Select.
Ah.
Fong break. And you can see the hotkeys there too, right? UN.
Oh, okay.
If I click and drag, There we go. And I can put in the same value for that if I want to, 1.5. Now for the desk, I really don't need to do any smoothing on it. The chair, I needed that back to be more smooth, so I added that subdivision surface. The desk doesn't because it's pretty much a square, blocky object anyway. Okay? Now, if I decided that I don't like that bevel tomorrow or the next day, I can't just go back and undo it or delete it out. Okay? So that's why typically you want to copy things so that you have a backup of that desk. Alright? So I'm going to hit undo. I'm going to grab my desk, make a backup. There it is. Throw it onto my old junk layer. Add objects. And then go back to this one. Go back to Fong break. Go back to bevel. Oops. Spin around. There we go. All right. So now I have a Fong break on that, or a bevel on that, so that looks pretty nice. I still could do some stuff to this. I still could go and grab the vertices or the points and still move this up and down. But my ability to go in there and kind of, like let's say taper the legs less or more is now gone away. Because there's so many points now at those, at the bottom of these feet, that it wouldn't be very easy for me to go into this area and try to do that normal scale. Look at all the points that are right there. It's going to be very difficult to stretch that out, because when I do, it's only going to grab that one face. It's not going to grab the entire thing and scale the entire thing correctly. Okay? So basically a bevel is something you're going to do at the very end of your model. Okay? So typically I do a low-res model, bevel it, and then I can subdivide it if I need to. Every one of your objects should have that beveling put on it. Okay? So UN, select all, bevel, slight little bevel on there, good. And then I'll move on to my next object. Okay? So the more you put these bevels on, the more realistic your stuff is going to look. These nice little highlights that we're picking up on the edges, it'll just make it look all that much better. Okay? So you don't need to do it to actually every object in yours, but just try that out. Okay? What else?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
When you select something, did you just select it and then hit a Fong break, and then automatically just chose?
You have to make sure you're in edges, because that's what the Fong break is on. And then you have to make sure, obviously, that you have everything selected. Actually, you don't have to have everything selected. It'll automatically select it for you.
When I selected everything and I hit Fong break, it made me want to reselect all the edges.
Right. So that means your number is not low enough. So mine's at 72. So make sure your number is low enough and then hit select all, and then it should. Okay. So what I want you to do now is I want you to finish up your chair if you haven't finished your chair, obviously. Finish your desk if you haven't finished that. And then start creating some items for your room. Very quickly you can take some basic shapes and just start making things. Just to show you a quick example, here is a cone, right? So we don't start everything from a cube. I'm going to rotate it. Try to rotate it to perfectly 90. There we go, 180. If I click on this again, I can go to my caps. I can turn the caps off so I don't have caps on this. I can go to my object height segments and change these. I can hit C. I can grab faces. I can extrude these and pull it straight down. And now I have a lamp. It's a very bulky looking lamp, but I have one. I would probably scale that and then do that. Okay? So, play with the tools. Play with the extrude. Play with the beveling. Play with the knife tool a little bit. And just start populating your room with different items. They're not going to look fantastic. They're not going to look photorealistic. Don't try to make them. All you need to do is worry about getting through understanding how to navigate the system a little bit better. Okay? Questions?